Is there a better way to think about profitability in your restaurant? We look at restaurant value engineering and how it can help you increase the amount of money that you take home each week. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 146 of Secret Sauce, the restaurant marketing podcast, Restaurant Value Engineering.
Some restaurants are quiet, lose money, and the owner works 70 hours a week. Other restaurants are busy, profitable, and the owners work a few hours a day. What's the difference? They have a secret sauce. Join James from Marketing for Restaurants as he helps you come up with your recipe for restaurant success. Your secret sauce.
Now, I know what you're thinking. What is he talking about? And that's because restaurant value engineering is a new concept. Well, it's a new term in restaurants. We're going to talk about value engineering and we're going to talk about restaurant value engineering, but this is intrinsically something that I see many successful restaurants do really well. And it's just because it's something that they have seen work and they know that it makes them money. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to apply the concepts of value engineering to the restaurant industry. So we will cover the concept of value engineering. We're going to look at its history because there's some interesting stories that we can tell from that. We're going to look at the concept of cost and we're going to look at over-engineering. I know there are some restaurants that do this and they do it in spades and it costs them a fortune. We're then going to look at what restaurant value engineering is. We're going to look at how it's done. So once we break those concepts out, you're going to be able to start seeing the components in your business and the way that you can better manage them so that you're able to increase the value of the products that you generate. We've got a really interesting case study about KFC. And now you might just say, hey, that's just a bit of brand marketing, or hey, they were pretty lucky to come up with that. And you could be right. But what I think is if we look at this through the lens of restaurant value engineering, you can really start to grasp the fundamentals of it and how you can engineer value. And why would you want to create greater value? Well, because that is going to do things like add to your brand value. It's going to add to the profitability of your restaurant. It's going to make it easier for you to find new customers. And when those customers do come into your restaurant, you're going to be able to charge them more money. So more customers, each being charged a larger fee for the goods and services that you produce. Notice I put in there goods and services. That's interesting. You're going to be able to you'll have more customers and you're going to be charging them more. That means more money for you, more profitability, more restaurant profitability. That is pretty cool. We're then going to go through 10 examples of restaurant value engineering. And these are going to be the kind of things. What I want to do is I want to give you a smorgasbord of options that you can look at in your restaurant and go, never thought about it that way. This is a really interesting way that I could maybe create a little bit more value. So you're going to be able to impact your revenue and the profitability of your restaurant. Most of it's going to be pretty low cost, which I think is really exciting because a lot of it is about the way that you're going to frame it in the mind of your customers. Cool, let's get into it. So firstly, the dictionary describes or defines value as the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And this is something that I think is really important to think about because it is the value is the regard that something is held to deserve. It is what a person is prepared to pay for that. So let's just think about a bottle of water, which is a very undifferentiated product. It's a bottle of water. It's pretty ubiquitous. They're all around there and it's hard to differentiate them really. We're talking about still water. We're not talking about Evian. We're just talking about a plain bottle of water. If your restaurant is in the middle of the Swiss Alps, water is probably going to be valued a little less than somewhere where it is somewhere on the equator where it's boiling hot. It's, 40 degrees Celsius. That's 104 Fahrenheit. So people might be a lot more interested in our equatorial restaurant. Now, if someone has been in the desert for 5 days and they stumble into your restaurant, they would place a much higher value on a bottle of water, particularly if your restaurant is the only restaurant that has water. It's the only place that they can get water. They're going to really need it. In fact, they're probably dead after 5 days in the desert, but they're very keen to get that water. So something to think about. We're not talking about the average customer here. There's always going to be value that you want to be thinking about as you niche down on the various people who could be coming into your restaurant potentially. Some of those will have just had a drink. Some of them will be completely parched. How do we work to extract the most value out of that? A really good example of this is Accor Hotels. So a few years ago, they came up with a strategy where they wanted to be able to provide accommodation for everyone. But that's really difficult to do because of the fact that some people, when they're looking for a hotel, are going to be looking for certain things. Many people are going to be on a budget. So how do you get the right balance of value to provide to the customer at a price point that you can provide that is profitable for the company? Because it has to be profitable, otherwise you go out of business. And so they came up with a strategy where they had a brand at each of the 5 stars. So 1 star was F1 Hotels, 2 star Ibis, 3 star Mercure, 4 star Novotel, 5 star Sofitel. Non-competing brands, very clearly differentiated. So for each type of customer, they had a solution that they were in the mix for. And it's not about individual customers either. It's about individual circumstances for those individual customers. I've stayed at each one of those brands. So I remember we were going on a long road trip and we had young kids with us, and anyone who's done and we're talking, I don't know, it was 20 hours. Anyone who's done that with young kids, you know just how exciting that is. So we decided to overnight, and because of the fact that we were overnighting on a horrible road trip, we wanted to stay in the cheapest place possible. That was going to be clean and cheap. That was what we're after. That is F1 to a T. A lot of work's been done in there that if you're expecting someone at the front desk, probably not going to see that out of hours because that's not part of what they offer. Very clear on the value proposition that they've got for people. Also stayed at the Sofitel when my wife and I wanted to celebrate our anniversary. Quite a nice and luxurious place to stay. Now, in value engineering, traditional value is defined as the ratio of function to cost. If you're thinking about traditional industrial manufacturing, it might cost you $1,000 to build something. So let's think about a TV. It might cost you $1,000 to manufacture it. Those costs are going to come from, a lot of those costs are going to come from the components that you put into that television. When you think about the function that television is going to have, you might be building a brand new 48-inch television. It's going to be cutting edge because no one's got 48-inch televisions. Well, actually, so that's not the case because we know that you can get much, much, much bigger televisions than that today. And this is the whole point of that. When you look at a 48-inch television or the latest television that's coming out, it is probably going to have a limited lifespan. And this is one of those concepts. So in value engineering, one of the things that people say is, they don't make them like they used to. This is where planned obsolescence comes into it. Engineers and marketers realized that many products were going to have a short lifespan. So if the lifespan of a product is 3 years, it's pointless building a product that is going to last for 10 or 15 years. Now, planned obsolescence has got a bit of a bad name these days, particularly when companies like Apple build obsolescence into the product before the user wants it to be obsolete. So there was some software that would slow an iPhone down because what they wanted to do was to encourage people to go and upgrade to the latest version of iPhone. Now, that's probably unethical and wrong, but many products don't have that long lifetime. They don't need to be manufactured to last for 20 years. That means that the components that you're using to build that product don't need to be as robust, don't need to be as high cost. You're now decreasing the amount that it costs you to produce that product, which means that you either sell it for a lower price or make a little bit more profit in there. Like many innovations, this came out of World War II, and it started in a General Electric. Because there was a war on, there were significant shortages in skilled labour, raw materials, and component parts. So 3 GE engineers started to look around for some of the products that they were manufacturing. They were looking for acceptable substitutes. And they noticed that some of these substitutes often reduced costs, or they improved the product, or both. And so what started out as an accident of necessity turned into a process that became systemic in the way that they developed their products. So all they wanted to do was to continue manufacturing, but some of the inputs that they needed to manufacture the products that they were building weren't available. They found some alternatives that were cheaper or better or both. That's pretty cool. So let's get into restaurant value engineering, because this is, I think, where the magic starts to happen. So let's have a quick look at a definition of a restaurant that I've come up with that's going to help us as we look at restaurant value engineering. So a restaurant is a just-in-time manufacturing business employing a range of skills from an often transient workforce with time and temperature-sensitive inputs, delivering products to meet dynamic and changing customer demand. That is quite a mouthful, but in a nutshell, it highlights many of the problems that you've got when you're trying to run a restaurant. But it also highlights many of the opportunities that you've got in building value for your customers. The area that we want to play with is the difference between the price that it costs you to create and the value that your customers put on that item. We want to look at ways of decreasing the cost of an item that we are producing and increasing the value that people put on that item. So we're going to try and make things cheaper, and or we're going to increase the price that we can charge for them. If we look at 2 examples from outside of the restaurant industry, it'll give you a bit of an idea about what we're talking about. So iron ore. That is an undifferentiated product. It's really hard to build a brand around iron ore because you can get iron ore on an open market. The value is in extracting the ore from the ground. However much it costs you to get it out of the ground, add on some transport costs, and that is the price that you will be able to charge for, or that you need to charge for the iron ore. And if that is less than the open market price, then you are going to make profit. If it is more, then you will go out of business. So, and this is why we see a lot of mines that will shut down and then in 5 years' time, they'll open back up again because the spot price of iron ore has gone up. It's now profitable for them to be able to extract it from the ground. Compare and contrast with, say, an Apple Mac. There's a lot of value in the design aesthetics and the software, the Mac OS, that creates value. Now, it's effectively a computer, and the specs aren't as good as a Windows PC, but they sell for more. That's because of the value that's been built up in the brand and possibly the functionality of those computers. So even though realistically, if it was a straight commodity purchase, no one would purchase a Mac because they're slower and more expensive. That just doesn't make sense. But it's about the value that people are purchasing is in the brand and the operating system, which, and I know I'll probably offend a lot of Mac users, but, realistically, they do the same sort of thing pretty much. How does that work for food? Well, at a commodity level, you've got, I think the most basic one would be, the fruit market or fruit and veg, where an apple is an apple is an apple. Now, they might look a little bit fresher, they might look a little bit nicer, but pretty much an apple, it's hard to be able to extract a premium price for an apple because they're pretty much just apples, unless it's some sort of niche brand that isn't easy to get, or it's something that's out of season and has had to be trucked in. And in the restaurant context, I would look at something like sashimi, where you've taken a product and you've sliced it. Now, obviously, there's different grades of salmon and there's different ways of slicing it, but we are moderately at that commodity price so you've got to start thinking about ways that you can de-commoditize the products that you've got on your menu. At the other end, all the way at the other end, we've got fine dining. And fine dining is one of those industries where there is a huge amount of value engineering that goes into creating something that is really high value. And we'll look into that because I think there's lots of things that you can take from a fine dining restaurant and put it into your restaurant to increase the value of the perceived experience. And this is, we're going to talk about experience engineering because this is an entirely related product to the menu engineering and the value engineering. It's a little bit offset, and I think the three come together quite nicely. But there's a lot that you can do in fine dining that is really important. And I want to talk about fine dining for one quick moment because of the fact that one of the components that we look at in a traditional value engineering model is over-engineering. And this is why that planned obsolescence or putting products in that if you've got 10 components in a product and one of them is going to last for 10 years and all of the others are only going to last for 5 years, then you've spent too much money on that product because it's going to outlast, it's going to be still working in every machine that gets thrown out. So it's crazy generally to have a product like that in there, a component in that product. So in fine dining, there's a lot of areas where an expensive product is put in there and you would have to argue what is the value that it is putting in there. And this is one of those arguments that I see happening quite a lot between chefs and owners where they're arguing about the costs of the menu. And the chef is arguing, but I've got to have this ingredient and I've got to buy it from this place because it's the best possible. And the owner's saying, well, if you bought this, it's half the price. And is any of the punters going to be able to tell the difference? No. Why aren't we doing that? In fine dining, the food costs aren't the only areas where there are very high costs compared to the average restaurant. Labor costs are also significant. And they're a much bigger cost on a per table or per seat component than in your average run-of-the-mill restaurant. And look, quite rightly, because when people are paying $200, $300, $400 a head, they're obviously expecting a much better degree of service. But I think some of the most interesting things that are occurring in the restaurant industry are where people are taking some of the concepts out of fine dining and bringing it down to your normal kind of restaurant, but leaving out some of the other stuff. So what they're doing is they're focusing like a laser on providing a really, really high product or service, but not delivering the entire fine dining component because they're then able to create a product which doesn't have a lot of competition, is quite differentiated from their competitors, which means that they're able to demand that price premium in a lot of cases. When I talk to people about the concept of restaurant value engineering, what I hear a lot of people, the question I get asked most often is, how is that different to menu engineering? Menu engineering is, as we know, a multidisciplinary approach towards maximizing the profit of the menu. Value engineering sees menu engineering as a component of the process, but it's much wider and it is complemented by experience engineering. I see a lot of people who profess to be doing value engineering in their restaurants, and then you look at it and you think, wow, there's some significant areas that have been let down here, or their restaurant is fundamentally unprofitable because they are serving every single person who comes into the restaurant at a loss because they are doing a couple of things here. They have engineered an experience that they are unable to deliver at a price point that their customers are willing to pay for. And that is why they are losing money hand over fist. And this is what I think the heart of value engineering is for a restaurant. It is really understanding the costs for each and every input that you've got that you need to create the goods and services that you need to in your restaurant. So we're looking at rent, we're looking at electricity, we're looking at fruit and veg, we're looking at alcohol, we're looking at labor, we're looking at time, taking all of those things, really understanding what it is that they cost, and then working out what they generate as far as your value proposition goes. Then you look at the other side of the coin. What is it that your customers are actually paying for? We've talked about this quite a few times on the podcast. We've talked about if you're doing delivery, then it's convenience, and people will pay a premium for convenience. In many restaurants where it costs $500 a head, they are kind of paying for the food. The food needs to be really good, but that's not what they're actually paying for a lot of the time. If you've got a table of 10 diners and there's probably a large corporate who's paying the check for all of those people, what you are doing is you are allowing that business to demonstrate how much they love their customers. That $500 is a really important component of it, not because of the price, but how much it enables them to demonstrate how much they love their customers. And I've said this before, in Melbourne, there's a few restaurants that are like that are really quite expensive, and the product is much more about people spending a lot of money on someone rather than getting an amazing meal. This gets really quite difficult when you think about all of the customers that come into a restaurant. Let's have a look at McDonald's. Everyone's familiar with McDonald's. So the value proposition that they have is targeted at a range of different people. So for people who are traveling out and about, what value would you put on being able to go to a clean toilet as opposed to a gas station toilet with no toilet paper that was cleaned 18 months ago and potentially has 3 as yet undiscovered kinds of fungi growing on the floor? So for travelers, it's the ability to go to a toilet that's actually quite clean. This is why they put such a big emphasis on cleanliness all throughout the restaurant. What about parents who want somewhere that they can take their kids? What about people who are looking for a quick meal? Maybe they're on their lunch break. Maybe they're looking for something just on the way home. Lots of value propositions there that they have as they niche down on the customer segmentation. And that is something that I think that you need to do even in a little tiny restaurant in a little tiny town. There's many things that you can do to really create value, which means that you're not going to be leaving any of that money on the table, because that's the worst thing. You're going to all of that hard effort to create the food, to create the amazing experience, but you're not charging appropriately for it. You're leaving some of that value on the table. Now, the customer gets a great deal. The customer gets an amazing deal, and that is fine. That is great up to a certain point. And I've seen it in restaurants where everyone says this place is amazing and they go out of business, because they haven't been charging enough for the amazing service and food that they've been providing. I've also seen it in someone who has worked for 20, 30 years building up a restaurant brand, and at the end of it, they've got nothing to show for it because they haven't been looking at the value that they create, then charging a fair and reasonable price for that, so that they've been either able to build up the business to the point that they've got a saleable asset, or being able to pull money out of the business so that they've got something for when they retire. These are really, really important things that you need to be doing in your business. And so in the next episode, we're going to run through our 10 examples of restaurant value engineering. And these are just some really quick and simple, some of them are a lot more complicated, but they're the kind of things, they're ideas for you to think about so that you can increase the revenue in your restaurant. You can increase the value that your customers are getting. So you may not need to do anything, but you might not change the price, but you might change something in the way that you deliver the goods and services that you do in your restaurant, and then your customers are going to see or perceive. That's important. They're going to perceive much better value, which means maybe they're going to start talking about it a bit more. Maybe your marketing will have a little bit more traction as people go, yeah, That's cool because that place is really bang on in what it is that they do. It's all about how they perceive that value. Been lucky enough to eat at restaurants where it's $500 a head, and the next morning woken up and thought that was amazingly good value. And I remember a place where we'd been tipped off that they had that we should try their donuts. We went in and tried their donuts, and they were awful. They were I don't know if they were having a bad night, but they were very heavy. We threw them in the bin, and the $1 a donut that we were paid, I felt really ripped off. I probably spent $8 in total. The perception of the value, that's absolutely key. So tune in next week. We're going to have some really cool examples of some restaurant value engineering, many of which, if not all of them, you're going to be able to try in your restaurant. So stay safe out there. If you're still in some sort of COVID craziness, stay safe, mask up, socially distance, and we are slowly getting through it. Slowly, hopefully. Alrighty, that's it. Bye.
Want more customers for your restaurant, cafe or takeout? Every month, our marketing tools and information are used by thousands of restaurant owners just like you to help them find more customers and turn them into repeat customers. All of our tools and information is designed specifically for restaurant owners. We know you don't have a lot of time to spend marketing or learning complicated procedures, so our tools are quick and easy to use. If you're looking to increase your revenue and profits or want to work less hours, check out marketingforrestaurants.com.